This is True North Story, the original podcast series. Learn, love, listen, live. Are you ready to discover your True North Story? With your hosts, Tama Fulton and John Hudson Messerol.
Barry, you've had quite a journey. I mean, you worked here in rock and roll radio, and you were an adventure seeker.
Yes.
Is that easy to say?
Still am. Yes.
Yeah. Well, of course.
Yeah.
I mean, we'll get to that.
Exactly.
But tell us a little bit about your growing up here in
Seattle
area.
I grew up in Bellevue. I was born actually in Pullman over on campus at Wazoo, and then moved in Bellevue in 1974, and then went all the way through school in the Bellevue School District. And then around graduation time, I had a fun time. You know, great friends. The friends I had then, I still have now. So it was a really good upbringing. And then little brother, little sister, mom, dad, that same house is still lived in by somebody in our family. And then right at the end of high school was looking for an adventure and wasn't ready to do the college thing yet. Probably would have partied out if I had gone too early. So went down to the Kingdom and at the Sportsman Show at the Kingdom looking for a job. And I made little business cards that had my name and phone number and address. And I went to every single booth in the Sportsman Show at the Kingdom. And I just walked into the booth and said, hey, what do you do? And, we're a dude ranch in Montana. I've always wanted to do that. Really? What are your experiences? I have none, but I've always wanted to work on a dude ranch, and here's my card. And then I went to the next booth. And what do you do? We do fishing out of Cabo. I've always wanted to do that. What's your experience? I have none, but I've always wanted to do that. And I went to every booth in the Kingdom. And the next day I got 2 phone calls. I got one phone call from some Scottish guy, and I had no idea what he said on the phone. The second guy called me and said, hey, Barry, I really liked your attitude. I liked the fact that you talk to people in my booth that you didn't know. You're tall. You don't know anything, so I don't have to retrain you of any bad habits. Do you want to move to Alaska and help me build a hunting and fishing lodge? And I said, okay, well, when do we leave? And he went, well, I'm actually leaving on Tuesday morning. I'm driving up to Alaska. And I went, well, it's Sunday. You mean like the day after tomorrow? And he said, yeah, if you want to go, meet me at 3:00 in the morning at this address in Kirkland, and we'll go to Alaska. All right, well, what should I bring? And he said, no, don't bring anything but an empty duffel bag. It's cheaper to fill it in Canada. All right. So I went upstairs and went, Mom, Dad, I'm moving to Alaska. And they went, where are you moving to in Alaska? And I went, I never really asked the guy. I have no idea. And they went, well, who are you going with? And I went, I don't know, some guy named Alan. And my mom went, what if he's crazy? What if I'm 6'2", I weigh 200 pounds. What's he going to do to me? 2 days later, I got into a truck with a man I didn't know, and I drove to Alaska. So
where'd you end up?
I ended up on a beautiful island called Admiralty Island, which is between Juneau and Petersburg and Sitka down in the southeast Panhandle. And it was just a fantastic experience, just a wonderful adventure.
So you had this hunting and fishing lodge, and you had folks coming up, and you were taking them out on excursions?
That's exactly what it was. We got there, and it wasn't built yet. It wasn't completed. So I helped build it, or helped finish the build, I should say. And then I learned how to plumb, and I learned how to wire, and I learned how to paint, and I learned how to build things. And then we tore down a bunch of trees, and we built cabins. And then in the morning and in the afternoon, we'd go fishing, and he would show me where all the fishing spots were because I'd never fished. I mean, I was a kid in Bellevue, and he taught me how to fish, and then he taught me how to hunt. And 2 months later, guests started showing up, and then I would take some guests out, and he would take other guests out, and it was just a fantastic experience for this kid out of Bellevue.
There's obviously an off season to all this.
There is.
And so what happened to Barry during that time?
1 year I came home. 1 year I stayed up there completely and caretook the lodge and lived out like The Shining in the middle of nowhere. And then 1 year I ended up getting onto a small cruise ship that was going around our island. The island was 100 miles long. So they would go around, and every 2 weeks they would end up in our lodge area. And I got to know a lot of the skippers. And one of them one day just mentioned he was taking his boat to Mexico. And I went, really? Do you need anybody to take it down there for you? And he went, well, yeah, if you'd like. I went, I would like. So I made a deal with him. He gave me a small allowance, and I jumped on his 76-foot Romsdahl trawler and took it all the way to Cabo. And then we lived in San Diego for a month and retrofitted it, and then ended up in Cabo for quite a while. And then I ended up living in Puerto Vallarta for quite a while, and just had a fantastic time down in Mexico, getting my tan back from having been in Alaska for a long time.
Wow.
And then at one point, one of the boats I was living on, the skipper went, "Hey, you ride motorcycles, right, kid?" And I said, "Yeah." And he went, "Well, I need my motorcycle brought to Mexico. Can you go get it?" I went, "Okay, where is it?" It was in L.A. So he flew me to L.A., and then I rode his motorcycle all the way down to Baja to Cabo, and then over to La Paz, and then ferried it across to Mazatlan, and then rode all over Mexico on this beautiful BMW old bike, and then ended up in Puerto Vallarta, dropped it off for him, and got back in a boat. So,
well, you know what John and I were doing? English 101.
Yeah, it was
college algebra.
It could have been college, yeah. I just kind of bypassed that for this adventure of the world, and it was fantastic because what happened is when I left Mexico, flew back to Seattle and did the sportsman show for the lodge in Alaska, and then I did that for a week, and then I just finished the motorcycle trip, and I flew back to Seattle, and then I was there for a week, and then we drove down to Portland for the Portland show, and I had my motorcycle put in the crates that we would ship around the country, so when I would get to certain towns, I would have transportation at the sportsman shows for the Alaska Lodge. I was staying at a friend's house outside of town, and I was riding my motorcycle into the show and got hit the last day of the Portland show. So literally I just did this 2,000-mile motorcycle trip, and then within 3 weeks I crashed my motorcycle back here in the States and put myself in the chair, and that was in 1991. So
for folks that don't know, Barry, you had a pretty catastrophic accident.
Yeah, I was on my way from my friend's house outside of town, Portland, and I was on this beautiful road called Marine View Drive. It's just fantastic, and it's just made to go fast on. I had been on the road 3 or 4 mornings in a row going to the show and realized there was this beautiful straightaway that was just waiting for me to see how fast I could get my bike to go. And I had an old Honda Interceptor racing motorcycle. And I came around the corner onto the straightaway, and there were 4 cars lined up in front of me, so I decided to pass all 4 of them at the same time. And I pulled out to the left, pulled by all 4 of them, and right around 100 miles an hour was what they estimated my speed. One of the front vehicle in that line of cars turned left and hit my back tire as I went by him at 100 miles an hour.
Wow.
I went about 75 feet across the pavement, spinning on the bike, staying on the bike, and then I went off an embankment, and I landed on the bike, and the gas tank popped open and covered me with gasoline. And then at that point, I flew off the bike, and I actually bounced off of a flight of stairs and then hit a building and shattered my spine and paralyzed myself from the chest down. So from my sternum down, from that moment of February of 1991, I haven't moved anything or felt anything from my chest down, put me in a manual wheelchair. So it was pretty catastrophic.
Yeah, I'll say. To see your smiling face and to see, this effervescent personality, John, you would never know. It's like you have no bitterness about you. You have nothing about you that's like,
Thank you.
Life just dealt me a bad hand.
Yeah, it was a bad day. I was fortunate.
Obviously, that's been a process, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's a lot to take in as a young man. Share with us how you worked through that then and kind of a little bit of the evolution to where you are now, because obviously the two probably are not the same and more an evolutionary journey. But can you share with us a little bit about waking up and realizing what had happened and how your path had changed?
Yeah, it was. I was very fortunate. The woman who was in the car behind the truck that hit me was a nurse. So she was on the scene instantly, and then an ambulance happened to drive by. And I've actually met the ambulance drivers a couple of times over the years, and I was just lucky. They just happened to be right there. So I was in the hospital, and I think it was within 18 minutes or 20 minutes of my crash. And then I was in the ICU for quite a while. The whole first 2 months was a bit of a blur. I had a helmet on, which is interesting because there was no helmet law in Oregon. And sometimes I wore it and sometimes I didn't, but that morning I chose to. And I had all the leathers and I had everything on. So I was pretty protected. So I had no body damage at all in terms of skin or rashes or anything like that. And then I ended up in the ICU for quite a while, and I don't remember exactly how long. And then they moved me to the ortho-neurotrauma unit of a hospital down in Portland called Emmanuel Hospital. And the first period of time of kind of coming through this was a blur. I didn't really know what had happened. Of course, it couldn't have been my fault. There were all sorts of different things that were, obviously going through my head. And all my friends were there. Immediately there was this group of guys that, I grew up with that I'm still friends with that were all there, like within, 12 hours. Of finding out. It's funny because in the ICU, only your family is allowed to be with you. And it was amazing how I had this huge group of brothers, some of whom weren't white. And but the nurses just let it slide. And then they moved me into the ortho-neurotrauma unit, and I lived there on and off for the next at least 6 months. maybe even more towards 8. I did some rehabs in and out, but I was there for a long time. I didn't realize that I was paralyzed at first. It was, which is funny because people had told me, and the discussion was around not being able to go to the bathroom and all these things that were changed, but it didn't sink in until the day that the reverend of the hospital actually came in. It was the first time that the fog had gone away, and he was talking to me, and my nurse Valerie was in the room, and my mom was sitting in the room. He said, well, I realize it's really hard for a young man your age to be permanently paralyzed like this. And I looked down at my feet, and my sister had tied a pink pig and a pink cow, these little toys, to my shoes. And she did it because she was my little baby sister, and this was an opportunity to get him back, the older brother. I looked at the pink cow and pink pig, and I went, wait a minute. I can't make those move. And I looked at the reverend, and I went, excuse me, I'm what? And then he realized that he was the one who had just told me. I didn't know. I'd been told, but I didn't know. That moment is when it set in, and I looked at him, and he kind of freaked out. It was pretty funny because he realized that he was the one who had just told me. And he went, oh, okay, well, if there's anything I can do, here's my card. You just go ahead and give me a call. I'll come back in, and I'll be here for you. And off he went. I looked over at my mom, and she, to that point, hadn't let me see her cry. That was kind of their little thing was, let's make this positive. So she bolted out of the room because she had just realized that I had just figured it out. And I looked at my nurse, Valerie, and I just went, Val? And she looked at me and said, do you have any questions? I went, well, yeah. I went, am I ever going to walk again? And she went, no. She goes, do you have any other questions?
Just really matter of fact.
Oh, yeah, that's just personality.
That was her.
She knew me well enough to know. And she goes, do you have any other questions? I went, no, I think I need to be alone right now. She went, okay, well, you have the button. She said, I'll come back in time. She walked out. And that was when I realized, and I was told that I was permanently paralyzed. And then everything in the world changed that moment. It was all negative. It was, what can't I do? And, of course, I lifted up the sheets and looked down, and there it was, just hanging there, not doing anything, and now I got this damn pig and cow on my feet, and what does paralyzed mean? And everything was can't walk, can't run, can't jump, can't have sex, can't go to the bathroom, can't get back on the boat, can't go to Alaska, can't, and it was a rough day. And my mom didn't show up much that day because she knew I was going through it, and they all knew me pretty well, that I was a pretty strong character anyhow, so that being alone was more important than anything. Bella came in a little while later and said, you all right? And I went, yeah, no, I'm going to be all right, but I don't really know what to do next. And she said, that's okay. That's why we're here. And I was really fortunate that with my family, my friends, and my nursing corps, it was fantastic. They just stepped right up and said, okay, what can we do next? And then I went, well, I guess I got to learn how to do this. Yeah. What can I learn? Right. And what's really funny about it is that I give the credit to my parents, especially my mom. She never left my room, unless she was going to cry. And then my nurses, and I can still list all of them off. I still know all of them personally. I got back in touch with Valerie and the ladies, and Valerie changed the story a little bit and said, no, you were the one that told me you were going to beat this. And I went, no, Val, I kind of remember this of you saying you can beat this, and we argue about it. But it was kind of both ways. It was, no, this is just a huge challenge. Let's get it on. Now, it wasn't obviously that easy to do, but right from the day one, it was, well, what am I going to do now? I can't do all these things, but I really want to. So the evolution, to answer your question specifically, John, was a long process. But what was really interesting was right in the beginning, they brought in this guy, and I really wish I knew his name, but I just call him Todd. So no offense to any Todds out there, but he was your absolute stereotypical born out on 4th of July, Vietnam veteran, Lieutenant Dan, bitter, doesn't shower much, paralyzed guy with the same leather jacket he had on the day he left Nam, long hair, mustache, just absolute stereotypical right out of Hollywood dude. And he came flying into my room, and he smelled like cigarette smoke and just as raw as they come. And my chair was across the room, so I was kind of captured. And he came in, and he started talking to me about how cool it was to be in a wheelchair. And he was fantastic. He was so terrible. Wow. Dude, chicks love sitting in your lap, and you're about breast height, and there's some wonderful things about being in a wheelchair, dude. And, as he took a drag and said, don't tell the nurses I'm smoking in the hospital. I mean, it was just absolutely fantastic. And he was rambling on about a bunch of garbage, and I was just begging for him to leave. And he finally said, you know, kid, one thing you got to remember is that if you set a goal for yourself and you accomplish that goal that's way out there, man, that nobody could think you'd ever be able to do in a wheelchair, that when you accomplish that goal, then you'll know that your motorcycle crashed in the past and none of this shit matters anyway. And I went, really? None of it's going to matter anyway? He went, none of it will. Oh, all right. Cool. Thanks. Bye. And he left, and Valerie walked into my room, and she went, so how was that? I went, don't ever bring Todd back, ever. But you know what, Val? I'm going to Australia. And she went, really? And I went, yep. No, I just decided I was going to buy tickets before I crashed, and I didn't get a chance to do it. I'm going to Australia. I'm going to go backpack around Australia in a wheelchair. And she went, well, that's great, because you're about ready to have physical therapy, and you're going to learn how to put your socks on, or you're going to go naked.
Wow.
And that was really how it started, was Todd kind of inspired me to say, I'm going to Australia. Then I realized I had to learn how to get dressed. And that day was it stopped being I can't and started being, what am I going to do next to get there?
So one step at a time.
Literally, which is funny because it was literally one step at a time for somebody who doesn't walk. You know, I mean, that's, right. You know, it was, wow, at first I've got to put my socks on, which was a huge challenge. I couldn't even reach my feet, and I had this damn pig and cow still down there because Becky kept putting them on because I couldn't take them off. And, it turned this huge obstacle that was out there. Everything in my world was an obstacle, and all of a sudden it just became this challenge and this opportunity of, well, who said I can't? Don't tell me what I can't do. Oh, you can't go to Australia. Well, I can't go to Australia. Well, because you're in a wheelchair. So let's go. And then, you know, the next few months was this vicious, proactive, all right, I got to learn how to do this. You know, come on, let's go. And I was going to therapy and asking if I could do more. And the sequence of how to be paralyzed is written in a book. And they start you with A, and then you have to go all the way to Z, and then you get to leave the hospital, and then you'll know everything you need to know to go live the world again. And I didn't really like the sequence because it was going too slow. So for the next 6 weeks in physical therapy, we were going to learn how to get on and off toilets. I was like, how many toilets in the world are there? Why do I need to do this for 6 weeks? So my buddy came over one night, and nurses and everybody had left, and we bolted around the hospital, and we went on and off of every single toilet in the hospital that night. And we fell, and I was, arm in the toilet, and we were laughing, and it was as if we'd been drinking, but we weren't because we were just joking around. And I got on and off of every single toilet in the whole aspect of the hospital that I could get to. Men's, women's, didn't matter. We had a goal now. And the next morning when the therapist came in and she was like, so today, I went, we really don't need to do the toilets today. And she went, well, why? I went, because I got on and off of all of them last night. So what are we going to do next? And it was just this attitude. And then I ended up moving from one hospital to another, and they moved me up to Seattle to make me closer to home. And they moved me into a hospital a little far up north of Seattle. And it was a therapy unit. They just put me right in the stereotype of, well, now you're a new paraplegic and your life is going to be different and your life has changed. And I'm like, shut up. Teach me what I need to know so I can go home. I hate all of you. And I'm not really in that negative way, but it was like, oh, you're treating me like I'm 5. I'm not 5.
Barry, how much of that is your approach to life in general, your personality,
95%,
your attitude? Yeah,
it was who I was before. I'm a true believer that something catastrophic, like the word that you used, or something tragic that happens to someone, it's a personality enhancer. It really is. If you're a super negative person and you're a glass half empty and the world is going to end and this is so terrible, and then something happens to you like this where you're now a paraplegic or a quadriplegic or you've got MS or you've got something that seems so daunting, your automatic drive is going to be negative. And luckily for me, mine was positive. So this was well, let's see what I can do in a wheelchair. Let's go shock the world. Let's go do things that they told me I can't do. So to answer your question specifically, I was very fortunate that I was the glass half full guy, and I was the guy who was like, no, we're going to win the game. We're not going to lose. Yeah, I know we're down by 30, but we'll win. Right. Don't worry about it. We're going to figure it out. So that was huge. But I can't give enough support to the people around me that didn't let me say no. Back in the hospital, the nurses that I had originally at Emmanuel Hospital, they were the most fantastic women in the world, and none of them ever let me start to feel like I could fail. they would challenge me and they would try and make me fail. So we're going to make it harder today for you.
Whoops, your spoon moved.
That's right. Exactly. Yeah. Oh, look, there's a double knot on the cow that's tied to your foot. And then the second hospital I went to, it was just a different mentality that they were very negative based on the fact that they were primarily dealing with a little bit of an older population than me, and they had never met me before, so they stereotyped me and put me in this little category of, oh, you're a new paraplegic, and you're a newly injured, and you're going to be negative, and everything's going to be a challenge, and you're not going to get up in the morning. Well, I was up in the morning before them, and I was ready to go. So the psych doc came in and did his little evaluation on Barry, and I snagged my chart, and I was reading his notes, and he wrote that he thought that I was suicidal because I was denying the fact that I was paralyzed and that my life had changed.
He thought you were in denial of it.
He did. He thought that I was trying to be super positive and over positive because I just was. And he wrote in my notes that I was in denial of my paraplegia and my new situation, that I thought my life was going to be what it was before. Because I had pictures of me in Mexico and in Alaska and my friends around the room to inspire me. But he thought I was holding on to the old instead of looking for the new, and he wrote in my chart that they put me on suicide watch. So I called my dad.
Oh, my goodness.
I read the chart to my dad and said, Dad, this is what they think. They truly don't understand what I'm doing. They think I'm suicidal. And my dad went, oh, geez. He goes, all right. So the next morning, my mom and dad were at that hospital, and we were having a meeting with the head of the therapy department and my physical therapist, my occupational therapist, and the psych doc and everything. And they literally took me out of the hospital that day, and we drove back to Portland. And they brought me back to the hospital that I had originally been in because they got it. So again, when you asked that, was it my attitude? Yeah, but I had a lot of help. It's a team approach. And I was fortunate to have a really rock star team around me.
Too, Barry, it's recognizing when the environment isn't right, too, and then doing something about it. I think a lot of people sometimes come to a crossroads and they find out, for example, what you found out. And instead of saying, hey, I need help to address this and get me to the right place with the right people to take the next step or to continue my journey back to where I want or think or feel I can be, and they feel kind of stuck. And so they don't do anything. You're not that type of person. You're obviously a person who's always pushing and always driving and always looking forward. It's amazing that your parents were right there and on your side, and that you could make a change so quickly when you're like, this is not where I need to be right now.
That's right. And I was fortunate, and I'll say this, with complete honesty, I was lucky that I crashed at the time that I did because the medical world was different then. And I was in the hospital for a length of time that now would be a quarter of that. So someone who paralyzes themselves tomorrow, they're in and out in 6 weeks. I was in and out in 6 months. I had an advantage that the way that the system was set up back then was more advantageous for the rehab. So I had that time as well. But I also, one of the things I learned was that right from the beginning was that it was okay to ask for help. And that was a huge challenge. I was 22 years old when I crashed. I was over 6 feet tall. I put on some weight, a good weight at the time. I could do anything I wanted. I had traveled around the world. I'd backpacked around. I'd rode a motorcycle around Mexico. I'd lived in Alaska, and I'd done all these adventures. So that the thought of having to ask somebody for help was a huge challenge for this kid who had done whatever he had wanted to do. And in the beginning, it was daunting, the thought of asking somebody to help me with something. And I could do this myself, damn it. Relatively soon, the nurses, and I give them, again, credit for going, it's okay to ask me for help if it's going to be easier for me to help you once you can do it by yourself. And I started asking for help. And I realized that almost immediately when I started asking for help, I got much farther than I could get by myself. And that was a huge learning experience for a 22-year-old kid who had been really independent.
Yeah.
And it goes what you were talking about, John, was that I did it because I had people around me to help me do it, and that I wasn't afraid to ask for help. And that was a big learning experience. And it's even to this day, it's one of the things I talk about in my public speaking is, hey, you're stronger as the team than you are as an individual. You look at any sport in the world, and Russell Wilson's a great quarterback, but Russell Wilson can't do anything without the offensive line helping him out. And it's a team approach, and you've got your defense on one side if you're looking just at sports, but it goes to scholastics, and it goes to sports and activities, and anything that you do, you're stronger as a team. I found that out early, and I was lucky enough to be able to grasp the concept. And I've had people carry me, especially a couple of dear friends of mine that have carried me in places that wheelchairs weren't supposed to go originally, will never go again, but my chair was there because I asked them for help. When I was still learning how to ask for help, they would just offer that help because they knew that I needed it. I wasn't too proud to take the help,
right?
But I had to learn how to ask for it. At one point, this is a funny story. My friends, when I first got out of the hospital and I was just brand new at figuring out life again, they would disappear. And this was before cell phones. They would disappear and I would call their houses and nobody was there. I'd find out later that they went and did something, an activity that I couldn't do. They would go hiking. So instead of just saying, hey, Bear, we're going to go hiking on Saturday, so I would know, they just wouldn't tell me because they didn't want me to feel bad. And it was great. And I finally had to sit them down and go, no, you guys, you don't understand. Don't not include me because you think I'm going to feel bad. Just tell me what you're going to do. And yeah, well, too bad I crashed my motorcycle and I can't go hiking anymore. It's not your fault. But don't leave me out of the equation. They went, oh, okay, that's cool. And so the second lesson I learned with all of that was that communication is so important. People don't talk about things. And then we don't talk about things, then there's this rift that gets put in the middle of things. And then, it happens at work, and it happens at school, it happens at teams. It happens all the time. Everybody really quickly learned that, hey, we just talk about it. And if people were uncomfortable, there were friends of mine that were super close before that just didn't really show up much anymore. I didn't understand it, and whatever. I'd heard that some friends would step forward and some would step away. And you never know why somebody steps away. Well, they would step away because they didn't know what to say, and they were uncomfortable, and they were afraid they were going to offend me, and would it be different now that I was in a wheelchair than before? And it took a while to figure that out. But again, I realized that all you have to do is ask, And I've found now that if somebody's uncomfortable, I know it immediately. And I can curb it right up front by just saying, hey, ask if you have any questions. Especially in relationships when I started dating again. There's a whole bunch of what cans use and can't use do's that, normally you don't talk about that anyhow. But, you've got someone who's paralyzed and they're like, what can and can't work and doesn't work and how does it work? And I just had to, I'd meet someone and go, if you don't ask, you won't know. So communication became that second really, really important, asking for help, but just being able to communicate and learning how to communicate. And it works with teams and it works at work and it works at school and it works everywhere that if you're not afraid to ask for help and you're not afraid to talk about the situation, then you should be able to get most things done.
True North Stories, meant to inspire, encourage, motivate, and offer hope. And now, back to the program.
Well, it's interesting because Tim and I were just talking about this not too long ago. The culture that we live in, that's so technologically driven and text versus a phone call or even a face-to-face meeting or just sitting down and spending time opposite another person is so rare that hearing you talk about the collective and being able to ask for help, I'm glad to hear that because I'm like, people need to hear that message. People need to know that they need to look people in the eye, that they need to deal with that communication that you're referring to in a face-to-face way. It's okay. You can't deal with things that you don't understand or that you're unnerved by if you never address them.
Oh, absolutely. What's really funny is my son and I just today, Gavin and I were having a hamburger earlier, and we're sitting in a restaurant, and he was probably 3.5 years old or four maybe. He was standing behind his dad, and he was just staring at me. And finally he asked me something about, why don't your legs work? Or why are you in a wheelchair is what he asked. And I said, my legs don't work. Well, why don't your legs work? Well, how do you describe that to a 4-year-old? So I said, well, they just don't work, so I use a wheelchair. Well, how do you drive? I was like, well, that's a pretty good question for a little kid. I mean, he was little. Yeah. And the dad was really, really, really uncomfortable with this conversation. And I went, well, I drive with my hands now. And he just couldn't grasp that. Well, how do you use your feet with your hands? And he started asking me some really random questions about how I drive. And then he went, well, how do you see? And I said, well, I see with my eyes. I look out the windshield. And he went, oh. Okay. And then the dad was like, all right, let's go, buddy. Let's see you later. And what was hilarious about that whole thing, and my son Gavin was just laughing because he knows. And
sure.
He was like, well, we could explain it to him, Dad. I went, no, he's 4 years old. He doesn't need to know. But the 4-year-old, he wasn't afraid at all to ask.
Right.
His communication was there. He was asking me for help because he was asking me for information that he didn't understand and didn't have. And it was the dad that was totally uncomfortable with this whole situation. And not because he thought his son was, bothering my son and I having lunch. It was because he was uncomfortable and he didn't know how to communicate.
Well,
and this 4-year-old kid just totally stepped up. And I had a great little conversation with him and, gave him the fist bump as he walked away. And he's not going to be afraid of people in wheelchairs. The next person in a wheelchair he sees, he's going to go up to him and go, hi, because I went, it's pretty cool, isn't it? And he went, yeah, that's cool. He was checking out my chair because I've got, a sports model. But his dad was the one who was having a tough time with it.
Well, how do you find that people respond to you? Talk to them on the phone and, hey, we're going to meet for coffee, or I'm coming to your meeting today. What are people's reactions?
That's interesting. Just last night, I was down at Oregon State University, and they have this fantastic program where they put undergraduates that work with freshmen and sophomores that then volunteer. And every Friday they get together in some big building there at OSU, and they work with disabled kids, mostly developmentally disabled. And they one-on-one pair these kids with students. I got to talk to a bunch of them yesterday. Me being a para and being in a chair, the kids, especially with developmental disabilities, were all staring at me and they want to know more and, what's my story. They will come up and touch me. The kids will, like with Down, especially with Down syndrome. They'll just come over and they'll just touch me and they'll look at me and they'll hold my chair and they'll hold my hand, and because I'm an adult and I'm sitting there having a conversation and I'm something interesting to them. Mm-hmm. Because I'm not like they are, but yet I'm different too. And there's this level of genuinity. I don't know if that's even a word.
Genuineness.
Genuineness. From them that they feel this connection of, oh, wow, you're different, just like us, and you're talking to people, and that's so cool. And in that setting, the students and the undergrads, they all get it because they work with disabled kids all the time. So to them, I was nothing, and none of them, they smiled and said hi, but there was nothing. But the general population is really interesting because they don't want to say something wrong. People are so worried about being politically correct to a fault that they'll either say something really stupid because they're trying not to say something wrong, or they won't say anything at all. I have a great, great time watching people watch me because they either completely ignore me, pretend I'm not there at all, and it's blatant. And I mean, my 10-year-old kids hear it and get it and watch it and laugh. They stare at me just like a kindergartner would. And I'm talking about a 45-year-old adult who sees me and goes, whoa. Especially when I had my long hair, they would really freak out. But, and they're looking at me like, whoa, look at that guy just jumped off a curb, Or you get someone who actually has met someone in a chair before, or knows somebody with a disability, or knows somebody who's different, and they just smile and say hi. And, that's great, but that's the minority.
Really?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
So what would you say to somebody who maybe is uncomfortable, who they see somebody with a athletic limb or in a wheelchair, and would you tell them to just...
No, I tell them that don't ever be afraid to ask if you can ask what happens to them. Give people the permission or the opportunity to bow out of talking about it. Now, I'm super comfortable talking about my situation. I don't even think about it now. I mean, my eyes still look out. I don't look down, and I don't see the chair because I'm not looking at the wheelchair. I'm looking out. So you see the chair more than I do, even though I live in the chair. Mm-hmm. I tell my kids, I tell adults, if you see someone who's different and you want to know why, just go up and ask, hi, would you mind if I asked why you have that hat on? I'm thinking about a turban. I saw a guy the other day who was wearing a turban, and I actually thought, well, I'm going to do what I talk about. I went over and asked him, can I ask you why you wear a turban? Uh-huh. And he kind of looked at me, and at first he gave me that, what are you getting at? Is this going to be racist? And then he went, oh, yeah, you can. And I went, well, why do you wear one? I don't understand. And he explained it to me. But I gave him the opportunity to say no. Uh-huh. Because lots of people, especially those who are in chairs and those who have disabilities, aren't as comfortable talking about it, and they don't want to talk about it. But it gives them the opportunity to say yes and no, and then you've instigated the conversation. And, it's the one different person in the room.
Right.
And do you want to go over and acknowledge them just so they feel like they're part of the group? Well, it happens to me all the time. It's hilarious. People come over and just touch my shoulder and go, hey, man, it's good to have you here. Well, you didn't do that to anybody else in the room.
And you saw it. We know.
And I'm laughing at it because I knew what he had just done. He felt better about himself because he just included the handicapped guy in the room, and it makes me laugh, and I don't really care. I don't take it that personally, and I don't take it that seriously, but some people get very irritated with that, and there's lots of people within the disabled community that I go to odds with a bit because they get really offended by things like that, and I just laugh. I'm like, yeah, whatever. The guy wasn't trying to be a jerk. He was actually trying to do the right thing. He just didn't know how to do it.
Yeah, exactly.
Or people will do things, they'll kneel down, and they'll talk to me eye to eye, which is really uncomfortable because they're feeling awkward, and now I'm trying not to look down her shirt because she's like bent over in front of me, and and I'm looking right into her eyes, making sure that I'm not getting in trouble. And I mean, it's funny because it's awkward because people don't know what to do. And what's hilarious is my friends, because I think about it, my friends just don't do it. They stand above me and they talk down at me, and I don't think anything about it until they kneel down. How much of that is because of the awkwardness of people being put in a situation with something they're not familiar dealing with? That's exactly what it is. It's people who, we're uncomfortable with things that we don't know very much about. And it's one of the reasons why people stare, and it's one of the reasons why people look away. I talk about this again in my speaking about how we treat people that we don't know if they look a certain way, because we automatically put people in a stereotype. And I believe the reason we do that is evolutionary safety. That when you hear the car horn, your adrenaline spikes and you jump, because evolution has told us that when you hear a loud sound, you need to make sure that you need to get out of the way. If you hear the lion, and the lion roars, your goosebumps are going to come and you're going to jump, and you're going to have to clean your shorts out later, but you're going to jump first and then you'll be alive to be able to clean your shorts out. And I think that there's evolution there. And I think that there's also evolution. And when you see something that you don't understand, then you're leery of that because it's not in your comfort zone. And what we're really bad at, or what I believe that most society is bad at, is taking that and then not being able to look through the fact that, yeah, they're different, but that doesn't mean that it's bad. And, people see me in a chair and I'm different. So they don't know what to do. And with political correctness, the way that it is, they're afraid to talk because they're afraid they're going to say the wrong thing. Is it disabled, or is it handicapped, or is it physically challenged? Well, Barry works. My friends call me dickhead, but, it's that, well, we don't know what to do. And I think that same thing happens with, different cultures and different religions and different language and different skin colors. And you see someone who is looking a certain way because of their culture, and you automatically stereotype them for all the things that you've seen or heard. Now, stereotypes are there for a reason, because there's a certain group of people within a certain situation that all do the same thing. I mean, that's where a stereotype starts. So if you look at every single culture in the world and every single person who's in a group in the world, there's a stereotype about that. And it's there because there's a reason. But it's what we do beyond the stereotype. You see the person who, like I said, I saw this guy wearing a turban, and it just dawned on me that I didn't know why. So I went over and asked. I had a great conversation. He was a super nice guy. That it's breaking through the stereotype that's there. And people do treat me different. And I don't really care. I mean, it doesn't bother me at all. It makes me giggle more than anything. I think Emily, my wife, probably gets more irritated than I do, because people do stare and they look at her and think, oh, that's so nice that she's his nurse. And I was like, that's right. I got a really cute nurse. You should be jealous.
Have you spent more time in the chair than you have out of the chair?
I have, actually. February 10th is the 25th anniversary of my crash. So 3 years ago was the 22nd anniversary. February 11th, I took the day off because that was the day that I was officially in the wheelchair longer than I wasn't. And that was a really weird day for me.
I bet.
Hitting 45 and years old, that didn't bother me at all. 40, that didn't bug me at all. The 20-year anniversary of my crash, that was a pretty emotional day for me. And I actually made a video to thank all of my friends for everything that they had done for me, because I didn't know what else to do. I didn't know how to say thanks, because the only reason I'm as happy and as well set up as I am is because of all the people around me that helped me get there. So I made this little video and I sent it to everybody. And I haven't done anything for 25 years, but the 25-year anniversary. But again, it's this milestone, which is interesting. When I was several years ago, I think it was the 15th anniversary of my crash, I was working at this company and had some employees, and people were calling me that day. Hey, dude, happy anniversary. Because my friends call me on February 10th. And they'll call and go, hey, dude, can you believe it's been so many years? And my dad called me. And he's like, hey, Bird, happy anniversary. And I went, yeah, thanks, Dad. Can you believe it's been 15 years? And no, we talked for a while, and I got off the phone, and the woman who was working for me went, oh, how long have you and Emily been married? I went, what? She went, well, you said it was your anniversary. And I went, oh, no, it was the anniversary of my motorcycle crash. And she went, people call you for that? And I said, well, yeah. She goes, you're the strangest friends. I went, actually, that was my dad. Because people don't get that. I should be dead. This is a gift.
Exactly.
Well,
it's
there you all
go.
a gift.
Right. That makes it
every day
all the more
is a gift.
Exciting.
Just last week, I attended a funeral of a dear friend. He's younger than I am, and he died of cancer. I drove home, and Emily and I took the day off, and I was driving home, and it just kind of hit me. Man, I got a bunch of friends I need to call and say hi to today. because it's just a gift. You know, we never know. And he's got 2 little kids and a family and all of us. And again, it reminds me how lucky I am. I mean, I hit a flight of stairs at 75 miles an hour. You know, there's so many things I could be. Head injured, quad, dead, burnt.
Right.
And I'm just a paraplegic. You know, it's pretty easy. You know, it's all a matter of perspective.
You can deal with that, huh?
Yeah, you know, again, Todd told me there were some advantages. He was right. You know, that's.
I have to say I love the positivity, because one of the things that we're really striving to do with True North Story, we recognize that there's a lot of negativity out there. There's a lot of folks who are really self-absorbed and focused on their world and what they're doing and what matters to them, and opening their eyes in a way that they can see beyond themselves is part of what we're trying to do with True North Story, is bring guests in and let them share their stories with our audiences in the hopes that they can see that life can be different, that they can, you know, learn new things, that they can incorporate new things into their daily walk that could change the collective. More people started viewing the world and fellow friends, family, coworkers, just humanity in general, and view them differently, and their relationships with them. That can be transformative. And we really, really super appreciate your story, because it is uplifting, and I've learned a lot just listening to you. Thank you.
You know, you're welcome. And you know what's fun is that, you know, I'm a people person. I love people. I love studying people. I love hanging out with people. I love, joking with people. And when I was traveling, I actually had a really great opportunity. After I crashed, the state of Alaska paid for me to go back to school, and because I couldn't be a fishing and hunting guide anymore.
Oh, right.
You know, when you're,
sure.
you know, when you can't outrun the bear, you know, you shouldn't be out by the bear. and they paid for me to go back to school, and I actually got into radio broadcasting because I always wanted to be a disc jockey. That was my goal in life. And so when I was in school, the state of Alaska said, no, we don't think that radio broadcasting has any money in it, so we're not going to pay for you to do it, but we'll pay for you to go get a marketing degree. Well, I went to the college that had a radio station and had a radio broadcasting school, so every single one of my electives and every time I had a few minutes off, I would go into the radio station and I would just hang out. And then ended up getting an internship at a radio station here in Seattle, and I had the most wonderful woman who took care of me, Kathy Faulkner, let me be her intern, and she, you know, kind of guided me in that little path of this lifelong vision of being a disc jockey in Seattle. And what was really interesting was when I got on the air finally, I realized that it really wasn't what I wanted to do, and that I wanted to be in front of an audience, because I wanted to have the feedback and the immediate feedback from an audience. And no bad words at all to my friends who are in the radio industry who, you know, play in that world, because it's so much fun, but it wasn't what I wanted. And I didn't know that until I got there. And I actually achieved my goal. I got on the air at KISW. That was my goal in life as a little kid. And I got there and went, oh man, that really wasn't what I thought it was going to be. I want to get in front of an audience. I want to go tell my story. I want people to react to me. And after my crash, I started talking to kids, and that was my therapy, was getting in front of an audience of, you know, 500 or 1,000 high school kids. And over the course of the first 2 years I started speaking, I realize now looking back that I never admitted that the crash was my fault for about 2 years. And then I backpacked around the world. I took 2.5 years and I went and visited countries everywhere. I started in New Zealand and Australia, and I backpacked around Europe and had the most amazing time. And then I came home and I was speaking while I was traveling, and I started speaking again. And I found old videos that I had done before I left, and then videos of when I had gotten home from this trip, and realized that sharing my story was therapy for me. And that it was that expression of what I was going through to share with a group of kids that allowed me to realize that it was okay to admit that I made a mistake. It was my fault. And I can't blame anybody but Barry for being in the chair. And maybe that's a huge advantage I have over somebody who maybe gets hit by a car and then is paralyzed, because they can be angry about it. I can't be angry with anybody but me. In a sense, it's a good thing it happened that way. But then when I look back and realize, wow, I used that as my therapy to be able to share my story with other people. And then in that process and in that journey, as I was backpacking around the world, and I mentioned my friend Brian, because he's the one who carried me halfway around the world, and he took me places that wheelchairs weren't supposed to go and they will never go again. And that he and my friend Michael, those two just picked me up and took me where I needed to go. But what was interesting was that Brian would walk into a room, or Mike would walk into a room and in another country, coming from the Seattle area or coming from wherever we came from, and nobody would look twice. I would walk into the room, roll into the room, and everybody would look because it was this huge deal. You're backpacking around the world in a wheelchair? Wow. I was like, dude, he's doing it too. He's the one who carried me up here. But they didn't care about him. And immediately I noticed it, but I didn't think about it. And then later, as I started looking back and then as I started studying it, I realized that my chair was breaking barriers because people were putting me in this situation and they were putting me on a pedestal that my life was harder than theirs. And because they now think that my life is harder than theirs, when I do the same things they do, people get inspired by that. And what's really interesting about it is, and again, I'm at odds with the disabled community quite a bit because I don't play the game. And there are quite a few, and I respect them, that their opinion is that you shouldn't be inspired by them because they're in a wheelchair. They just live their lives, and that you shouldn't feel sorry for them, which then inspires you. But I don't think that it's feel sorry for at all. I think that when you see somebody who has a challenge and you watch them overcome the challenge, then you're inspired by that.
Absolutely.
Whatever the challenge is and whatever the situation is, it doesn't make a difference about the wheelchair. It's just the act. You know, if you do something that is challenging, you know, whether it's climbing the stairs in the Columbia Tower to raise money, you know, that's a challenge, and you overcome that, then great. I'm inspired by that. And I found that people were inspired by me just coming in the room. I had a challenge getting up that morning because I had to get into a wheelchair, and people were inspired by that. And I thought that's fantastic, that if I have an opportunity to inspire people by just being me, then let's go. Let's take that opportunity. And the more people that I speak to, the more people that get inspired. And it's so much fun to know that my friends roll their eyes and go, dude, really? You know, just because you bungee jump doesn't make you any specialer than anybody else. Because my friends were the ones that carried me to the top of the bungee platform. You know, they roll their eyes and go, yeah, whatever, you're just Barry. But other people would see that and go, wow, you bungee jumped in your wheelchair? And I'd go, yeah, but I wet my pants. So be careful. You know, and then they'd go, dude, you did? I go, yeah, I totally wet my pants every time. Just so you know, most people who bungee jump wet your pants. You know, and if you didn't, you're lying. You probably did. You know, so again, it's this really interesting dynamic that I found that people really were inspired by the fact that I was just doing things, and that's neat. I think it's cool that I have that opportunity to be able to share that message of, hey, you can do whatever you want. Don't let people tell you what you can't do. You know, go do it. If you want to, try. And if you fail, then you fail. Then you've learned from that failure, and then go try something else. You know, don't let it stop you just because it can.
Right.
You know, and people get stopped by the thought of not being able to do it. I don't think like that.
Speaking to kids, that started in Australia, didn't it?
No, it actually started here. I started talking to kids here, yeah.
Okay.
And then ended up talking to kids all over the world. But yeah, the very first time I talked to kids was in the Seattle area. Okay. Actually, the first assemblies I saw were in Portland. I was still in the hospital, and this organization approached me and said, hey, we're looking for people who did stupid things and lived and to go share that story with kids so they don't do stupid things like you did. And then it's a program called Think First, which is a national nonprofit organization that is sponsored by the Pediatric Neurosurgeons of America to lessen the number of head and spinal cord injuries that are out there for kids. They approached me, and I started talking to them with the program, and it's a great program. And then luckily for me, the Washington State program was very proactive, and they realized that we had an opportunity to do more than just brain and spinal cord injury prevention. So great board of directors and a great executive director, and they allowed me to do quite a bit more. So the schools were asking for, primarily high schools and middle schools were asking for staying in school and sexuality issues and drugs and alcohol and drinking and driving. And we split the conversation up from just the original brain and spinal cord injury prevention thing. And then the National Think First program didn't like that, so they told me I couldn't do it anymore. So I went and started my own company. And in 1994, started a company called Talk and Roll Enterprises. And it was primarily set up just so I could go talk to kids about making choices. And then next thing you know, I was doing Rotary clubs and then associations and then huge international keynotes, and I've been doing that as a hobby and now full time as a career. So it kind of grew from something that was just hey, come out and check this out, and that was the passion that I realized after looking at radio, going, wait a minute, no, I want an audience. I want to go share this. Let's do it.
Now it's become exponential here. That inspiration that you give to people, you want to inspire them to go do stuff themselves, right?
Yes.
And so we've got this whole new thing starting.
Yeah, it's fantastic. The corporate for quite a while, especially when the twins were little. Emily wasn't really excited about me traveling, doing public speaking, leaving her home with twins. So, I went corporate and got a real job, and I've been playing in and out of the walls of Microsoft since around 97, and just recently left that to do my speaking full time. Got a couple of different projects. I have talk and roll still that I do, the keynotes, but golden acts, random acts of kindness is kind of the mentality that, what did you do to change the world today? And we want to challenge people to go out and change the world. And we figure if every person does something, that affects 2 people, and those 2 people do something to affect 2 people, in like 5 generations, we've affected a lot of people. We're having a good time with it.
It's a pay it forward, isn't it?
That's exactly what it is. Yeah. And what have you done to change the world in a better way? Mm-hmm. And not necessarily I'm doing it for you so you do something for someone else, though that is definitely part of the concept. But the whole idea of if you do something good, then it will affect other people. And we've been researching this, which is funny that studies show that when you do an act of kindness, that physiologically that makes you feel better. It's not just, that made me feel good. It's that your body changes when you do good things. And we've been studying it. We actually just approached OSU to go research it for us, and say, hey, go check it out. See if you can actually, put some research behind this. And let's go see if we can actually physiologically change the way that people think. It's really cool.
You got any ink?
I do. I have a Calvin tat on my right arm, a Calvin and Hobbes.
Okay.
And I'm about ready to get a pirate flag on my right arm as well.
Okay.
But yeah, just one at this point. Yeah, when I was in the hospital, there were some down times, and my buddies were bringing me Calvin and Hobbes books because they knew I liked them, and it would make me laugh. And when I got out of the hospital, I just had to pay homage. So I found this little dude down in Seattle who was really good at cartoons, and my brother and I went down, and he got a Tasmanian devil, which is very appropriate. And I got Calvin. So
that's awesome.
Yeah,
we're working on Tama. We're going to bring her into the Ink family.
Really?
At some point.
What are you thinking about?
I'm thinking about a true north, a North Star.
Yeah,
thinking about it. Yeah,
nice. Where?
Probably on my arm.
Yeah,
inside of my
it's a
arm.
good spot.
Yeah,
it just hurts a little bit.
It does?
Yeah, just bring a couple of suckers.
Well, one is going to be
because it gives you something
one
to chew on. So when the tears are
Right.
coming, yeah. My brother and I got ours together, and we both just stood there and looked at each other right in the eyes, like, "You first. Are you going to cry?" Because it hurt like a.
Yeah.
Well, it's funny because it starts out and you're like, "Oh, wow, what are people talking? It's not that bad."
Yeah.
Then all of a sudden you're like, okay, it's getting a little bit, it's getting up, because you start to feel it, and of course, the longer it takes, then, and it's funny, Barry, what the pain was the worst for me was on the shading. It wasn't even on the outline. You would think the outlining would be, the really fine needle when it's carving the outline or tracing the outline, and you're like, wow, that's really, but for me, and I don't know whether it was the artist.
Oh yeah, it was exactly the same thing for me.
Whoa.
And I got mine on my inner forearm, and he went over that big vein that they use to poke you with needles, and I thought I was going to punch the guy in the face. He's really lucky.
You're like, I really
So this is where yours is too.
That's right there.
Okay. All right. Well, we're okay.
All right, well, and I've been told that once you get one, that it becomes an addiction, and I have one, and Barry has two. It sounds like.
No, I have one, but I'm coming up on that second one.
Okay.
So.
Oh, you're coming up on this? Okay, all right.
Yeah.
So I'm with you. We're in the same boat then, because I'm going to get something related to True North too. Hence what Tama was referring to. So we'll probably do that together.
That's cool. Yeah, I told myself that when I got myself completely out of debt, I'd get another tattoo.
Okay.
So that was my goal.
Close.
I'm getting close, yeah. So that
Very
second
cool.
tat's coming pretty soon.
All right.
Yeah,
cool.
exactly.
Well, it might be the same time.
There we go.
I'll meet you there.
You got it.
If people wanted to have you come speak to them, where would they go to find you?
The name of my company is Talk and Roll Enterprises. So if they went to talkandroll.com, would talk just like talking and rolling. So talkandroll.com.
Very long. Thank you so much for being with us on True North Stories.
Yeah, you bet. It's my
Thank
pleasure.
you, Barry. It's awesome. Your story is wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to True North Story, the series. Follow us on Twitter @True North Story and tune in next time for another True North Story.